Hey everybody, this is Downtown Ricky Brown, and today we are looking at what I like to call distraction cognitive biases. So these are more cognitive biases. This is actually episode number 2. But these are cognitive biases that can cause us to get distracted by facts, events, information that just aren't relevant to the decision that we're trying to make. Once again, the context I'm talking about is for sports betting or crypto trading, things like that. But these can affect decisions that involve any kind of time or money commitment. Bike shedding. This is a weird name. I don't even know why it's called bike shedding, but this bias happens when people focus too much on the trivial and they ignore the important parts. I've seen people do this in arguments or when they're trying to out-debate somebody, or there's a particularly piece of information they don't want to hear. They can nitpick a detail that's insignificant, nitpick it to death, and then throwing the baby out with the bathwater, then throw out the whole rest of the argument, the important pieces of the important point that a person's trying to make by focusing on an insignificant detail. Like a person mispronouncing a word or misspelling something. Like, oh, look, I can't listen to you. You can't even do this little tiny thing. Now, true, details are important. But sometimes people who are bike shedding, it's a bias. It's kind of, I think it's because they don't want to hear the information. The information conflicts with their basic values. So they don't want to hear it, so they throw it out by focusing on an insignificant detail. In sports betting, this can happen like if you're watching a sports media personality and they're like, oh, this golfer, do you know the last 3 times this golfer's worn these red socks, he's finished in the top 5. Or this pitcher always wins a game when he's pitching the day before a full moon. Okay, that gets viewers to watch or maybe knock some person out of their stupor. Oh, well, that's interesting trivia, but it's totally trivia. If you're collecting data on a PGA golf tournament, you're looking at strokes gained, things like that, the weather, injuries. You don't care about what color socks they're wearing. You can get sucked into trivial information and take you off your path, off your course, or off the decision-making process that your data is leading you to. So it's one to be aware of. Sunk cost fallacy. This is when people basically throw good money after bad. The best explanation I can use is a real-life story with me. I'm so guilty of this. And I love Datsun 280Z sports cars. They're from the 70s. I've always loved these cars. And I was unfortunate enough to get a hold of one at one point. And this thing was a lemon from the get-go. But I was emotionally attached to the car. I love the car. The outside still looked cool. The engine sounded great, but it just one problem after another. Now I started sinking so much money into fixing this car that I got even more emotionally attached, and more importantly, it was like the sunk cost fallacy. I was like, well, I've already spent so much money on it. Now it's stupid to try to sell it and get rid of it because I'll never get my money back. So I might as well just keep sinking more money. But this car let me down. Every road trip I took, it would break down. It would go along pretty good for a few weeks, and then it would just boom when it was really important to break down. This thing was always doing that. I finally had to just unload it. How this relates to sports betting could be a model or a handicapper. Oh, I already invested so much money in this handicapper, but in this given time frame, he's still losing. Or I've invested so much money in this model, I can't throw away this model now that I'm using because I just put so much money into it. It's sunk costs, and it doesn't matter how much you've spent on it. If it isn't working, it isn't working. It's time to move on. Halo effect. Okay, the order in which we receive information is important. And we're going to be talking more about those kind of biases when I get into the anchoring bias and the availability bias. The order in which we receive information is important as to how we process it and make decisions on it. It's not really what the halo effect is, but the halo effect is more powerful if the first information you receive on a team, like in sports betting, on a team or a player, is just this glowing sports media review. Oh, this team is so amazing. This player is so great. That's going to sink into your conscious, subconscious, whatever. It can affect your betting decisions. So sports media has a love affair with a certain team or a player, and that's the first information you get before you even start doing your data research on a bet. It can skew your judgment if you let it. You don't want to get sucked into that. So find three counter narratives, 3 counter arguments to the prevailing narrative, and then also look at large objective samples of data. That'll help you get back down to planet Earth on these decisions. You don't want to get swayed by this. The opposite effect would be the reverse halo effect, when everyone's beaten down on somebody. We saw that with Rory McIlroy this year, and on Twitter, and before the 2023 U.S. Open, they were all beating down on the guy, and he ends up, Roy's done, and he's finished. Oh, he sucks. Every time the herd gets too negative on something, that's the time to start really thinking, this something's probably about to change here. Well, sure enough, in the U.S. Open, he came really close, and then he ended up just winning the Scottish Open, so he's playing well again. So either one. You don't want to get caught up in either one, halo effect or the reverse halo effect. Green lumber fallacy. If you watch my other video on cognitive biases, then you already know about the authority bias. This is similar to that. However, it's a little different. It's when, an example would be when sports bettors confuse an athlete's expertise with sports betting expertise. So Nassim Nicholas Taleb, I think I'm pronouncing that right, coined the term green lumber fallacy. And it comes from a guy who was a trader and traded green lumber. And he just made loads of money trading green lumber. However, this trader assumed he thought he was selling painted lumber that would have been painted green. He didn't even realize he was trading freshly cut timber. But it didn't matter because he was such an expert trader. It didn't really matter that he didn't know his product. That's how good he was. Similar to this would be a retired football player who's a great athlete who then becomes a tout or a tipster and starts talking about sports betting football. Now, this person obviously knows football like the back of his hand, but when it comes to sports betting, he doesn't. So then people will confuse that football knowledge with sports betting knowledge. There's lots of things in sports betting, such as probability, expected value, risk. These are all things that have to be included, not just knowledge of the sport. So when expertise in one field doesn't necessarily translate to another field, that's how it's similar to the authority bias. Important to know when you find yourself being influenced by on your sports betting by a former great athlete in the sport. Effort justification, aka the IKEA effect. Effort justification is a tendency to place greater value on an outcome that required lots of personal effort. They call it the IKEA effect because people who put IKEA furniture together will tend to put a greater value on that furniture because they helped build it. Now, for me, the best example of this is TV chef Gordon Ramsay. So I see a lot of the contestants, but the people on the show who brought him in, the restaurants are failing, and they'll get into an argument with him. They'll be fighting with Gordon Ramsay. Oh, but he'll be trying to change whatever it is, the layout of the restaurant, the food on the menu, whatever, and then the owner will inevitably, oh, but I put so much work into this. In other words, I put so much effort into building this restaurant. I can't change it now. It's like, well, the restaurant's failing. You're almost bankrupt, and they're going to argue with Gordon Ramsay about it because they put so much effort into it. So you have to realize effort justification doesn't justify failing like in sports betting. It doesn't justify a failing model or how much effort you spent into finding a handicapper and you located this handicapper after all this hard time and effort of finding this person. If it's failing, it's failing. At the end of the day, you have to have results. So sports betting, it's building models, finding handicappers, whatever you're doing in sports betting. Don't try to justify your effort to be hanging on to a dog, be hanging on to a losing model or losing anything. You have, at the end of the day, effort doesn't matter. It's all about results. So these are some of the cognitive biases that can get you distracted and keep you off topic and keep you from finding the really important details and the important facts, the important information they need to be focused on. These distraction cognitive biases can do just that. They can distract you from what's really important out there. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. Check out my channel for more videos. I'll be covering lots of things, but for now I'm focusing on cognitive biases and I'm categorizing them. So we'll be doing more of those. So make sure to check it out and try not to. See you later.